All right, guys. So, where to start the mix? We discussed headroom, right? So, really, this conversation can be a real result about the purpose of headroom and what takes up the most amount of headroom. By default, let me scroll back over here to our track. Let me play everything together. Here we go.
Ease the love pain. Let me take it to the max. I want to love you. Pretty young thing. You want some loving. Tender loving care. And I'll take you there. I want to love you. Pretty young thing. You want some loving. Tender loving care.
Okay, so you get the point. First thing is first. If you look up here, right, that thing is peeking out. Even though, if I go back to where I played from,
Ease the love pain.
the general sound in general never really hits that peak. It's some of the transients from some of the instruments, those big spikes in volume that are kind of like considered almost to be a separate thing and added on to the total level. That's what's creating the spike. So it's obvious that everything is, you know, not balanced. You can hear that synth part that I left in there. Guitars too loud, background vocals too loud. So the best thing to do is we start our conversation here. The four loudest things in the mix: snare. Let's see. Let me move this back over. I have no idea how this got over there. Love to see my snares together. Let me move this over here. So no matter what happens, when I'm starting a mix, and I just want to get a general vibe of what's going on, especially if there's a vocal track. In this track, there is a vocal track, a lead vocal. Sorry, I have to make sure that I'm getting a balance between these five things, since they're the loudest things in the mix. Here's reason one. We can start over here with kick and bass. If you remember, some of the most difficult things for the human ear to actually hear are going to be bass frequencies. It just so happens that the kick drum, the foundation and the heart of your drums, without it, everything sounds full and you don't want to move because that sub bassy frequency makes you want to get up and move. It's a big boom, right? With the bass, which is in turn the foundation of harmony, all the chords that are being played, the bass is actually holding that sound up, or the entire harmony up. And without it, everything feels kind of thin. By default, these guys are fighting one another. And decisions will have to be made about who has clear ownership of the bottom of the mix, because by default, guess what? They're very difficult to actually hear together. So we'll be making certain provisions to make sure that we can, right? And that comes a little bit later in the mixing process. Side chain compression, to where the bass, the kick can knock down the bass every time it's played. You'll probably need that, or it could be decided, because mixing, this is something I also consider. When you're mixing music, it's really genre specific anyways. Because if you go to rock and certain pop, a lot of people like to hear the bass and less kick drum. It's, I guess it's kind of a cultural thing when you think about it, because all music is cultural in a sense. So a lot of people say, hey, you know what? I don't want as much kick, but I can give the presence of the kick being felt by doing other things. I really want, more of my bass by itself. Okay. But if you go to hip hop, R&B, whatever electronic kind of music, since it's a real heavily driven dance music and you need that bass drum to get everybody to move, well, the decision will be made to make sure that the kick in the bass drum is prominent at the bottom of the mix. Now, with that being said, it's always good just to start out with here's the other part. Because they are bass, bass specific, and your ear has problems hearing, those instruments or those frequencies, you're going to have to turn these up much louder than you think for them to be heard. Because of that, let me move this over a little bit. Because of that, they're going to take up a lot of space. So it makes sense to make sure that as you begin to make sure that you have enough headroom, you're putting the major things in first. So here's the kick drum by itself. Okay, you put the bass in. See, the moment I put the bass in, you stop hearing the kick. That's how like severe that relationship is, because your ear has to make a decision, because it just can't hear both at the same time. So you know what I'll do? For the time being, I'm just going to drag the bass down. Maybe that helps this relationship a little more. It's better. Actually, I might be able to drag this down a bit. All right, cool. Let's see how we can work the snare drum in there, because we need the snare drum, because that's actually marking how the rhythm is actually behaving. You know, it's like boom, pap, boom, pap, boom. If it's just boom, 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 it doesn't have the same kind of impact. So you got to have a snare drum, no matter what genre or culture of music that it's from. If there's a snare drum, it's kind of like marking what the rhythm actually is. Here, you got two. Remember, we use two mics. There's a mic at the top, mic at the bottom. I brought you guys in the room to check this out, actually, during class. So let's see how that works. Oh, we can bring that back. Oh, by the way, this will be the difference between snare top and bottom. Right? That's literally where the stick is actually hitting. But the drum, it's a cylinder, and it has a second half. You know, there's the top half of the cylinder, and there's the bottom half of that cylinder, and they sound different. The snare's attached here. Let's hear how that sounds. Right? A little more crisper, because that's where the snare is actually located. Okay, put together. Some people would actually group these, so because once they find a relationship between the two, right? You know, you got your crispiness here, and then you got like where the actual drumstick was hitting. You kind of want to, like, you know, keep that relationship once you get it right. But that's neither here nor there. I'm just kind of getting these volumes straight right now. Just thoughts that you can think about. All right, great. Let me go back to the track to make sure I'm on a chorus. All right, cool. All right, here's Tyler, because, well, the most important thing is, can we hear the vocal?
Love you, pretty young thing. You need some loving, tender love and care, and I'll take you there. Girl, ooh, I want to love you, pretty young thing. You need some loving, tender love and care, and I'll take you there.
Okay, so this is the question that I'm asking myself as I do this. Can I hear everything? You know, can my brain process all four of those, of all five of them? Well, you know what? Yeah, because it's snare top and bottom. I'll call that two separate things. Can I hear all this stuff together? Let's see.
Love you, pretty young thing. You need some loving, tender love and care, and I'll take you there. Girl, ooh, I want to love you, pretty young thing. You need some loving.
Okay, I'm kind of in the happy area right here. I'm getting I can hear everything in the general context. Now, if I'm just starting out the mix, this is where you should be starting. Additionally, what I'm not doing is clipping this monitor.
Love you, pretty young thing. You need some loving, tender love and care, and I'll take you there. Girl, ooh.
Okay, once again, I can hear everything Tyler's saying. I can hear my snare in its job, marking at 2 and 4, and I can hear my bass, foundation of my harmony, and I can hear kick, foundation of my rhythm. That takes up the most space. This is where you want to start off. All right. Additional note. Everything is panned in the center. When you think about panning, and we'll be getting around to this, when you start to think about panning, what the pan pot is telling you in this track, for example, the lead vocal has presence in both the left and the right monitor. Once I begin to do this, I'm making it a more supportive thing, but that's not what I want to do. I'm definitely making sure that I leave this right in the middle because it's very important. This, my snare drum, very important. I reduce the power of it because when you think about it, that's what you're doing. And the pan pot tells you so. I am turning up the volume in this speaker as opposed to the other side. In this example, I'm way off to the left. That means that I'm creating the illusion, well, just the stereo placement, how's that, of this thing is actually over here, which allows me to hear it better if everything is sitting in the middle. But that's not, I don't want to do that with my snare drum. Same thing with the bass, that cannot be compromised. And the same thing with the kick. These elements have to stay in the middle of the mix. Right, and when you think about it, because of that, because they have to share, a certain amount of volume for left and right channel, for this one, left and right for the snare top, left and right for the bass, left and right for the kick. That's going to add more volume information right here, right? Because they're going to be taking up a lot of both channels of the information. All right, cool. So that's just an overview of where we're going to be starting. I'm going to do part 2 of this, to where we'll start to put in the other instruments and you can kind of see what happens. Everything's going to be forced to kind of work in conjunction with those main elements, right? I'll be picking up there.